Hey everyone, we're very, very lucky to have Katty Kay joining us today. The absolute force of nature that she is, veteran BBC journalist and broadcaster, US correspondent, special correspondent. I should give the full title because she has truly earned it for BBC Studios, reporting on US politics and global events, and currently now is the co-host of The Rest is Politics US alongside Mr. Scaramucci, who we were also lucky enough to have on the podcast, and we're incredibly grateful for Anthony for syncing us up with Katty. Katty's reported across the globe, including the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Europe, and is now bringing the US political landscape to a truly global audience with her work. And I must say, and plug her book, The Power Code, available in all good bookstores. And if it's not in that bookstore, that's not a good bookstore. So welcome, Katty. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Aaron, thank you so much. What a nice introduction. Thank you.
Katty, where I really want to start today is I just described you reporting from all of the I'm pretty sure it would be easier to name the countries you haven't reported from than the countries you have. But what I'd really love to start with is your perspective on looking through the lens of the traditional journalism that you did and pivoting towards the new media landscape and how that is affecting both the overall industry but geopolitics alongside that.
We are in this moment of huge transition, right, in so many industries, and it's very clear that that's the case in media and in news as well. In some ways, let me start with how it hasn't changed. I mean, I think when I started out as a kind of cub reporter in Zimbabwe in the early 1990s, what drove me to journalism was telling stories. I mean, I was living there. There were so many things that were interesting that were happening. I was meeting interesting people. And a friend of mine actually said, I was working for an aid agency at the time, said, you know what, you should be telling these stories. You're clearly, curious about them and you like the people you meet. You like talking to people. And I guess, you could probably say I'm just nosy. I mean, it's that sort of nosiness of a journalist. And I don't think that's changed. I mean, I think so at the root of all good journalism is that ability to be curious about what's going on in the world around you and then find a way to tell the story of what it is you're seeing and hearing and understanding. And that was the same in Zimbabwe in the 1990s. It was the same when I was living in Japan in the 1990s. It was the same when I was reporting from London. It's been the same here. The delivery mechanism is what's changed. So we've gone from a world where when I started out for the BBC, for the Africa service as a radio journalist, I would gather all my material together and then kind of, laboriously, oh my God, Aaron, it used to take me ages, cut and paste, literally stick the tape together with a piece of sticky tape and a Chinograph pencil. And you would play it out and you would have to find a kind of crackly phone line and, adapt your box. And one time there was a terrible lightning storm and the box was thrown one way and the lightning bolt hit our telephone wire and I was thrown the other way across the room and I survived it, the box did not. But so, I think the delivery mechanism have changed, obviously, with technology. And then we had 24-hour television came in, and I started to realize there was a risk that you could just be tied to a satellite truck. You would go on a story, but you would never actually go and have a chance to meet people because the demands of 24-hour television meant that you were sitting next to this satellite truck. And then exponentially, it's developed into, I think, what audiences want is no longer that top-down voice of God, whether it's Walter Cronkite or the BBC sitting there portentously at kind of 10 o'clock in the evening and telling them, this is the news that we think you should know about. We're much more focused on our audiences and telling the stories in a way that our audiences actually want to hear them. I always liken it to kind of giving people a bit of ice cream with their spinach. And I think for a long time we had the kind of ratio wrong in our nutrition diet of news. But so I think the delivery mechanism has changed. And now, of course, with podcasts, it's changing again, with TikTok, with YouTube. The way people are getting their news is changing. But in the end, it is still, I believe, about curiosity and telling people stories. however we get those stories to them.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you mentioned Walter Cronkite. I do miss Trevor McDonald and just that soothing voice of hearing him before going to sleep. But mentioning,
I grew up with the BBC World Service. I was living in the Middle East. My father was a diplomat, and every morning I would come down to the kind of doodle-doo, doodle-doo, and this is London. And so I grew up with that too. I loved that kind of soothing. It was rather reassuring, and that has certainly changed. It's become much more small d democratic, I think, in the way we deliver our news.
Yeah, I will say if there was one thing that I could bring back, though, it would be the transatlantic accent. I'd say, and purely selfishly, I've got a murder mystery party coming up, and I believe I've had a wink and a nudge that I am a journalist in the 1920s, so I've been attempting to. I'm not going to give you my best rendition because I haven't nailed it yet. But learning that with an Irish accent is incredibly difficult.
Those were the days. 1920s makes me think of kind of Raymond Chandler and the days when journalists were a bit like kind of private detectives out, gumshoe reporters out on the streets, right? That's my image of it.
But just talking to the delivery mechanism, Katty, the big thing that we're all aware of is we're kind of spoon-fed what we want to hear, and that echo chamber is created. You only have to go on to X and just stop on a super right-wing post that somehow has landed up on your timeline, and then all of a sudden you just keep getting all of those. I've noticed it more and more frequently, certainly since Elon Musk has taken over. That the algorithm is very much forcing things down your throat. So I would love to know your take on how can people force themselves out of that echo chamber, and is there something that we should be considering, myself as a tech founder of the tech community, but wider than that, society, whether it's social media training in school and the likes of picking up what's a deep fake, what's real news, what's not real news, and that side of the realm?
Oh God, I think it's such a great and important question, and it's one I've been thinking about for a while. I mean, for predating algorithms and X, from the moment the kind of internet exploded onto our screens and we started getting what seemed to be news sites, but were actually view sites. I always kind of divided them between news sites and view sites, and the realization back then, 10, 15 years ago, that the onus of responsibility was shifting from editorial newsrooms to individuals in terms of consumption of news, that we as news consumers had to get smarter, faster about making sure that we were able to distinguish between what was an opinion and what was news with editorial protocols, and also making sure that we were exposing ourselves again to a varied diet of news consumption. And that, of course, with algorithms working as efficiently as they are, has become even more important in the realm of social media. I think you're right. I think so if you take that to the responsibility now shifts to us as consumers to make sure that we are getting that varied diet and we are distinguishing between news and opinion. And so we know what the facts are as we go into elections, or all of the processes that make up democracy, to make sure that we as consumers and voters know that we are dealing with facts. I think there is an argument for starting in schools. Now, the problem is that it is changing so fast that our conversation that we're having now, I'm pretty sure in 6 months' time, would need an updated curriculum for kids consuming news. But the good news is that kids are faster than we are, and being natives, they understand the changes quicker than we do. But I think whatever we can do, whether it's education programs in schools, whether it's news organizations, making sure that the consumers of their news understand what goes into the news process. So we're being more transparent about our news process so that people know that they can either what they can rely on. I mean, I've had conversations with members of Congress who actually are reasonably bipartisan on this. It's one of the few things that members of Congress are bipartisan about, because they realize that when it comes to an election campaign, they are the ones that could be damaged by deep fakes and misinformation, and their campaign could be derailed. Should we be watermarking news that has been verified or video that has been verified. We get a piece of video out of Ukraine of a bombing. Should we be watermarking that as somehow verified as opposed to something that actually is video or something from 15 years ago? I mean, I think all of that we need to be discussing. It needs to be discussed in an education level, from a consumer level, quite possibly from a schooling level, but also from a political level as well. And there has to be more done, I think, here in the US from members of Congress to address this issue of the amount of stuff that is coming up because of your algorithms on X, for example, that isn't even real and that may well have been pumped into us from China or religious cults in Russia or China.
Yeah, and I say this, I've been caught out a couple of times, most recently by bunnies jumping on a trampoline, which I'm completely fine with that kind of like AI generated video, because I still prefer to accept that that was real because it has no negative impact. But there was a picture, I believe, whenever Joe Biden was in Belfast for the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and it was of him falling outside a hotel in Belfast. Now, I got fooled by it, but in my defense, he did fall a lot. So it kind of tracked from that perspective. But if somebody that works and lives and breathes in AI and AI products, there's a little bit of shame that if I can get caught out, then what are people on Facebook saying that they're getting caught out by?
I mean, is it shame, Aaron, or is it a realization that this technology is getting better and better? I mean, I think it's the latter. I mean, if you and I, 5 years ago or in the 2020 election campaign, you could spot a deep fake a mile off because somebody had 6 fingers rather than 5. Okay, so that's been fixed. Now they have 5 fingers. Fairly soon, we won't be able to tell anymore, and it's totally understandable that you were fooled by that video, particularly if it is in the context of somebody who has fallen before. I mean, how long is it going to be before you have politicians making statements that have world-shattering implications that sound that it is impossible even for you and I, who are reasonably well trained in this, to spot that that's fake, and then it's disseminated. So that's why I think it's beyond us as consumers. There is a political impetus here. I know there's some urgency up on Capitol Hill, but not enough. Not enough to think, what is it? I mean, the only thing I've heard is of the watermarking of legitimate material. But then you watermark legitimate material. Are people really looking at the watermarks when it's fake material? Or are they just, have they reposted the video of Joe Biden before, it's been verified?
Yeah, the one thing that I will say, and I think that X does this really well, is community notes. And I think that is a good solution to the, a part of a solution to the overall problem. But
look at what you just mentioned, I think, is also very important. You're seeing what you're seeing on X with the community notes and the comeback of people very quickly saying, actually, this is not, and I have seen that, a piece of video will be posted and very quickly it'll say, actually, you know what, this video is from Egypt 3 years ago, it's not from Gaza today, right? So we're getting that. But I don't know that that's what's happening on Facebook in individual streams where there is no incentive for verification. And actually, there is the opposite, which is people want to have their prejudices and their biases reconfirmed, and they don't want any verification or counter-argument put forward.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more.
I'm going to be honest, I don't spend a ton of time hanging around there, so I don't really know, but I can see how that could happen.
Yeah, I've done my best to try and limit it was one of my New Year's resolutions was it's called Brick, and it's a physical little RFID scanner. You scan it before you go to sleep, and I have one on my desk, so I don't see anything until I get up to my desk and have to physically rescan it. So it locks out apps that you would be using, and I find that it's certainly helped my mental health, especially the past few years, maybe past 5 years, haven't been the easiest on anyone.
I wonder whether, talking of school-aged kids, I have a 19-year-old daughter, and I have noticed that she and her cohort are actively spending less time on their phones and less time on social media apps. And she was born in 2006, so she's of the generation where they've had this all their lives. This summer, for example, she went to holiday with family in Scotland, and she left her phone at home with us in London.
I couldn't.
And no, I thought it was a very brave thing to do.
No one, it definitely is.
We had to get out an old family atlas and show her how to do the road map up through Manchester and then up to kind of Dumfries. But but she said for the first half hour she had a physical need to keep reaching for her phone, and then after about half a day she didn't think about it.
Yeah,
and she had no FOMO.
No, it's incredible, and I'm really happy to hear that.
Me too. I thought it was really encouraging.
If you could ask her for some advice for somebody that that opens their email, then goes to Instagram, then goes to X, then goes back to their email, and it's just a vicious cycle of going into an app that I was in 2 minutes ago. But yeah, I think it's definitely a painful one. But touching on not just the AI element, but there's obviously the UK the Online Protection Act. I would love to get your take on that, because my view of things is typically freedom of speech also has to come into consideration with freedom of consequences, or consequences of that speech. However, I don't like the idea of the mission creep. As well intentioned as the goal of the bill was, it would be very easy to see how it could be utilized by, say, we had a different prime minister or a bad actor involved in our government. It used in a very suppressive way whenever it comes to either journalism or just general freedom of speech.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, I know less about the UK situation, and I can see why the concerns are, but what I hear about it is actually, interestingly, from the American angle, where obviously a lot of tech companies are frustrated by the restrictions that they face in the UK and by the restrictions they face in Europe. Here there is a broader definition of freedom of speech, but there's also public. The moment you are a public figure, you are subject to kind of judge and jury from the populace. And a public figure is you or is me, right? Anything we say is deemed to be something that could be used against us at some point. So I think that I think there has to be some more regulation than there is. I think the amount of Wild West lawlessness is getting us into trouble quicker than we realize, because of the outside interference, not even just outside, but even internal interference that we're seeing, that is deliberately misusing platforms to misinform people or to feed people misinformation. I think it's one of the biggest threats we face to the democratic process at the moment. I hear you when you say that we could have a government that could misuse this to suppress freedom of speech and to suppress journalism. But I would say that we have not enough monitoring at the moment.
Yeah, it's very much where. No, I don't even think crypto is regulated enough yet either. But it's definitely feels very much like at the start of crypto, that was very, very wild west. You had NFTs that were somebody buying if people are stupid with their money, they're stupid with their money. But it was just a ridiculous situation, and I'm noticing that more and more from running an AI company, that their AI will become as dodgy looking, to use a phrase from this side of the Atlantic, as crypto was viewed.
I think the thing with crypto is that it still hasn't. Look, obviously crypto is going through a boom moment, but paradoxically, part of what is pushing it through the boom moment, which is the White House's embracing of crypto compared to the previous administration and putting people in at the SEC who are much more open to crypto. But when you have the Trump family releasing, Melania memes, tokens and Trump tokens on the eve of the election, actually people in the crypto industry who I've spoken to are concerned about that precisely because of what you're saying. They want to get rid of this perception of crypto as a kind of lawless, corrupt industry full of fraudsters. And then when you have people releasing tokens that then, potentially tens of thousands of people lose money on overnight, it doesn't help the industry in the long run. It's giving it a boom time at the moment, but it doesn't help the industry in the long run. And I think AI and the whole space of mis and disinformation has to also be, it's not just bunnies obviously jumping on the trampoline. There's a lot more harmful stuff as well that is being put out there in the name of real information or real news.
Yeah, I agree completely. We actually, in Hurry, we have a customer, or not a customer perk, an employee perk, which we call Hurry Inspires, and it's all internal, where we bring in an expert in the field. We had Emmanuel Asuko on, who is a financial influencer, but is a financial advisor as well. And this is just whether it's health and well-being, whether it's financial health. Obviously, the cost of living has been difficult for people. So we had him in actually 2 days ago to give just questions from our team, just to discuss it. And he touched upon he wouldn't have any crypto in his portfolio. So it was just an interesting take from an industry expert. I should say that is not financial advice as well. Sort of coming to the end of our time, Katty, I would love to. We pride ourselves at Hurry of having a very strong woman presence and strong female presence in our office. 67% of our dev team, our development team, are females, which is pretty much unheard of in the tech world. 50% of our C-suite are female led. I would not be able to survive a day without my chief of staff, Laura, and she is going off on maternity leave in a couple of months, which I'm terrified about. So I want to touch on the confidence code and the power code, and how you see tech and politics shifting, and especially around women in leadership roles.
So I don't know what it's like as much in the UK and in Europe at the moment, but there is a real chill here in America around diversity issues, driven by kind of the politics of the moment. That there is a feeling that after the Me Too movement, and just partly because women are better educated and we've moved from a kind of brawn to a brain economy, and there was a realization that this was a bottom line issue, not necessarily a PC issue. There are now a dozen global studies from the European Union, the IMF, Goldman Sachs, Columbia University that show that companies with more women in senior leadership outperform their competitors. So well done to you and Hurry for all that you're doing there, because it's a smart business decision. That whole argument was make it around the argument for diversity being a financially sensible thing to do. As somebody smart put it to me, it's not that it's the right thing to do, it's the bright thing to do. If you were smart, you looked at this as a bottom line profits issue. All those skills that were seen as soft skills that women brought to the table, I think now increasingly have been seen as profitable skills. And then after Me Too, that argument was pushed even further, and I think we saw much more attention paid not just to the kind of whole issue of sexual harassment, but to the whole issue of diversity and the hurdles that were on the table, how the playing field was not level for people that had been excluded from positions of power previously. But it's true that in the States at the moment, there is a real pushback against that. We see it with the government's orders around law firms and universities and companies even, that trying to expunge any mention of diversity and inclusion from company memos. I mean, it's a real sort of Oval Office capitalism that we're seeing at the moment, trying to dictate that. And DEI is clearly in the crosshairs of the whole MAGA movement. And maybe there's a feeling, well, it went too far. And I've often heard, often it's been white men say to me, well, I would have got that C-suite position, but, they needed a woman, the implication being that the woman wasn't actually qualified. And so I think we're seeing a kind of pushback against that. I do think that the kind of long-term trend is there because of the kind of education and skills level that we will see, and because the finances dictate that it makes sense, that we'll get over this bump. I mean, I was at a conference recently of women in law in Austin, Texas, and several women came up to me and said, you know, our annual meeting on for the women's network has been cancelled because the corporate sponsors have pulled out. And that's the kind of chilling effect that's taking place. I think that's, in the long run, that's a mistake, and it's a kind of one step back, but there will be two steps forwards, just because the economics make sense. I mean, we know that the more kind of diverse perspectives you have around a table, the better business decision you're going to come up with. I know it's been particularly hard in tech, so I really appreciate, you know, hearing what you've done, but also hearing that this just makes better business sense.
It genuinely does. Like, if I came in and Laura wasn't there, I would just end up sitting at my desk, not knowing what to do. And I say that because I pride myself in having strong female voices. I have a lot of strong male voices in Hurry as well, but with regard, like, just to give you an example of, Laura came in initially as an executive assistant. She became an operations lead. She then went off on maternity leave, came back from maternity leave, and didn't really know how to carve out a space for herself. She did that all herself from her own ingenuity, and then ultimately was promoted into our C-suite as chief of staff. And that, to me, is one of the examples that I love to share, because again, I couldn't do anything I do, and there's about 50 mortgages sitting on my head. So having her as a rock and a foundation is definitely something that helps us operate a lot better.
Yeah, and the other thing that I have heard, I mean, from some, you know, smart executives is, so those experiences that you described of Laura's experience of going off on maternity leave, often I think for women, you know, that you take that time out and it can set you back on the C-suite track, on the path to the C-suite. But actually, I've spoken now to some leading executives. I had a conversation with Christine Lagarde, who runs the European Central Bank and was the first female head of the International Monetary Fund, about this. And she said that when she saw her daughter-in-law managing two toddlers, it was like, she said, a light bulb went off. She said, hold on a second, this is crisis management, it's budget skills, it's constant negotiation, it's time management, and it's unbelievable amounts of stamina. And if you took those out of the parenting context and put those in a business context, aren't those exactly the skills that most chief executives are looking for in a high-flying employee? And so she's now actually got the European Central Bank board to count time off raising small children as something that is an active plus on somebody's resume, which is very forward thinking. I don't think that's what you're getting in the States at the moment, but it is very forward thinking. But it makes, if you think of it logically, it makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we pride ourselves on supporting our employees that go off maternity leave. We give them pretty much effectively full pay the entire time, whether they take 6 to 9 months off. But we're incredibly supportive of them, because my experience is they come back fighting, and they come back wanting to carve that out. And all I want to do is I want to support my team in general and be a foundation for my team in general. I'm very conscious of, I say this from a place of privilege, don't need to do this or be doing the job that I'm doing, but my team is fundamental to the joy I take out of life, and my job is to look after them. It's the Simon Sinek has a great quote that leadership is to take care of those in your charge. It's not to be in charge. So we definitely practice and preach that here at Hurry.
It's the idea of servant leadership, which I think it's a very compelling one. And I think the other thing that makes sense about what you're doing, Aaron, is that this is really talent management. I mean, I wish we could rebrand in the States while we're going through this rather dark period. Call it talent management and talent retention, because that's really what this is about. You've got these people who have these skills, and so it's how do you retain them? How do you keep them happy so they don't go somewhere else or quit, which is also the option. I mean, I did a story recently with the BBC, an interview about the number of professional women who are quitting at the moment, because it's always hard managing that juggle. But if you have a company that has your back and promotes you and doesn't penalize you for having taken that time and realizes the value of what skills that you're bringing to the table, I think it makes a huge amount of difference. I know from my own experience of I have 4 children when they were young. I mean, it was the night and day difference if I felt that my employer had my back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So just to end off our time together, Katty, because I know we're slightly running over, so I apologize for that.
Don't worry. No. I was late, so it's not up to you to apologize. I was on the wrong platform.
If I didn't, my mother, being raised in an Irish family, she would have my guts for garters. But the last question I have for you, is there any book or audio book that you would recommend for somebody to listen to in general, not including your own?
Tim Alberta's book, The Kingdom, the Power and the Glory, which is a wonderful book about the evangelical movement in the United States and the kind of politicization of the evangelical movement, how the evangelical movement kind of morphed into the MAGA movement. And what's so good about it is that Tim Alberta reads it, and he's a lovely reader. But he comes from an evangelical family. His father was a pastor. He was raised in the Christian faith in the United States. And it's really a portrait of all the people he has known through his dad's church, but through other churches, traveling through the country. So it's the voices of America and how what Donald Trump was offering, this man who is not particularly Christian, but how the evangelical movement decided to get in bed with Donald Trump and how it changed American politics in the kind of 2010s and early 20s. But he's a lovely writer, and anything Tim Alberta writes is worth reading. But being able to listen to him, I hadn't realized what a lovely reader he was as well.
Yeah, fantastic. There is that comical, I think it was from the 2016 election cycle, where Mr. Trump was asked, or President Trump, I should say, was asked what his favorite Bible verse was, and
all of them is what he said.
All of them. So, Katty, thank you so much for being on SaaSy AF. The Power Code, definitely look for it in only good bookstores. As I said at the start, if they don't have it, they're a bad bookstore. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, Katty. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Aaron, thank you so much. That was fun.